It took a physical assault to kind of break through that fog to see my child being hurt by his own father. Really hurt. So upsetting. I'm 55 years old and I'm going to talk about my ex-partner who I lived with for 15 years. When I met this man, I thought he was the most incredible person I'd ever met. Um, I'd never met anyone like him before. He was pretty much the perfect man, incredibly good looking, very wealthy. His personality was so engaging. He was so intelligent, incredibly humorous, well read, listened to really interesting music. And he was here in my small town. And for some reason, he decided that I was the most amazing person he'd ever met. Pretty much instantly decided he was in love with me and really pursued me from the second I met him. And I thought I was the luckiest person in the whole world. I kind of thought this is a bit strange, you know, because I'm just a teacher in a small little town. It just doesn't really kind of add up. He would message me all day, every day. He would ring me. He would arrange to come and visit me because he actually lived in a different city. He wanted me to come and visit him. It was just constant communication and constant, I love you. And I was at the age where I really needed to have a child and because I didn't have any children. And I was kind of thinking, oh no, very soon I'm not going to be able to have one. But he wanted to really have his first child too with me, and he just seemed so perfect. It was like, wow, but there's something not quite right. And then I thought, well, maybe it's because he is a computer nerd. He seemed to have not really had any previous relationships, or not anything significant. And he was in his late 30s or mid 30s. And I thought, well, this is a bit strange. But I just kind of put it down to him being a computer nerd, really.
This is something that we hear all the time. People are really, really enamored of the way that this person treats them and the way this person appears to see them, but it doesn't hit them quite right. They do still kind of feel like something might be wrong, something's not exactly adding up. It doesn't seem like it makes any sense. That's extremely common.
He told me when I first met him, I said, oh, past relationships. I was asking him, you know, because you want to know that sort of stuff. And he sort of said, "Oh, I had this girlfriend for 3 months, and I had this girlfriend when I was a teenager." And I was like, "Oh yeah." And I sort of pressed him on that and asked him a bit more, and he basically told me that they were crazy. Apparently, it was because both of them were sort of obsessed with him, and he had to get rid of them because they were just too obsessed with him. And I thought, oh, this is a bit strange. He was not only telling me that I was the most gorgeous person he'd ever met, the most amazing person he'd ever met, the most intelligent person, the most interesting person he'd ever met. He gave me compliments about things like my career. I was a teacher. He said how much he admired that because that showed that I was the sort of person that was caring and kind and interested in helping other young people. And that's true. That's exactly what that was the whole reason why I was a teacher. And he really admired that. And so he really just flattered me, and he bought me gifts. I'd never really had a boyfriend that had bought me, money was no object. He'd buy me this, that, and the other. Then within about 2 months of meeting, he was saying, "Right, I'm going to buy you an engagement ring." And I was like, "Whoa, this is fast, but okay." But this whole time that he was sort of pushing things along, I felt there was something not quite right, and I didn't believe all the flattering stuff. I kind of didn't believe him. I felt that there was something not right. I didn't take it all as face value. I didn't think, because I knew I wasn't gorgeous. I knew that I wasn't well, I am a vaguely interesting person, but I'm not. I wasn't everything that he was saying I was, and I knew that because I feel like I'm quite realistic and quite grounded. So I just sort of put it all down to sort of the excitement of a computer nerd. I didn't see this sinister aspect because I had no idea about love bombing or the notion that someone is actually not being authentic.
Again, this is extremely common. And that is one of the places where, when we start getting those alarm bells, even if we don't know the reason why we're getting them, even if we can't put our finger on quite what the problem is, we do need to listen to that, because you're getting that alarm bell for a reason. And it's because what the person is telling you does not add up with what you know to be true. It doesn't add up with your sort of image of yourself, and that can be an indication that this person is not actually seeing you for who you are.
One time we were in a park. I was running with my brother, just going, jogging, exercise, and he had walked into the park with us. We went off on our jog, me and my brother, and as he walked away, I just stood there and I stared at him. He was walking away, going home, but there was something about the way in which he moved that just had me stop still and unable to move. I was pretty much transfixed by watching him, but at the same time, I had this really, really strange, that kind of spidey kind of shiver up your back. It sent chills down me, and I couldn't figure out my stomach hurt. I had a basically a physical reaction to watching him, and I couldn't. At the time, thought I just dismissed it, and then thought, oh, and then just started running and catching up with my brother. But when I think back in retrospect, I know what that was. Part of my brain was telling me this person is a predator, but I just couldn't recognize it at the time. There's another thing about that happened in the initial part of the relationship where everything was so amazing. He invited me up to his stay in his house, and I don't recall exactly what he said or what he did, but I remember my response, and that was to go for a run. I had to get out of the house. And as I was running, I was thinking to myself, this is terrible. I've got to get out of here. I'm scared. And I got back to his apartment, had to go back. And I walked in and I just sort of went to the kitchen table and I sat down and I just said, look, I can't have a relationship with someone that does this. And I meant it because I don't know what he'd done or what he'd said, but it just had shocked me and frightened me. And so I put up a boundary. I just said I can't have a relationship with someone that does this. And I don't know what he must have said. He must have apologized. He must have said, I'll never do that again. He must have, because obviously, the relationship progressed and I didn't. If only I'd listened to myself and held up my boundaries, I wouldn't have suffered for the next 15 years. When someone says something to you that doesn't quite resonate with what you know to be true about yourself, it makes you think there's something wrong, but like there's something wrong, but you can't quite put your finger on what it is. Like it's not quite adding up. You only can really see it in retrospect, in hindsight. Uh, I did have reservations, but I think that the problem there's two reasons why I ignored those reservations. There's three reasons. One, I really did need to have a child, and I thought, well, this person is, even though I've got reservations about him, it's going to be fine because all those practical reasons why a female chooses a male. He can provide for us. Um, I'll be financially secure. So there's that, and I needed to have a child, and I will be financially secure by being with him, with a child. The other thing was, and I still don't know how this happened, but in my head, and I can't believe, I don't know how this happened, but I got very, very, very strong feeling. I convinced myself that he would never leave me. It seems such a strange thing to say now, but in my mind, I don't know how. I almost feel like he planted it. I don't know how, or the way he was towards me. I was absolutely convinced that we would be together for the rest of our lives. And when you decide to have a child with someone, or you decide to have a relationship that's going to produce a child, you want to feel that. You want to feel that you're not going to be divorced parents. So that was another reason why I progressed it. Even though I had those reservations, I felt that we were going to be together forever. And he was going to somehow be everything that he was saying he was going to be. Because my parents, are still together. I never thought that I would be, even though we didn't get actually married, we didn't get married even after he bought me an engagement ring. But yeah, my parents were together, and I never thought that I would ever choose someone that I would end up having to not be with long term. It's just shocking. Just after, very, very soon after he moved into my house, is when I first really thought, oh gosh, what's going on? One thing was that I had a dog that he'd got to know quite well. My dog died, and obviously I loved my dog, and I was very upset. At night, for about two or three, maybe four nights, I would just, I would lie in bed and I'd just cry. I noticed he was just so annoyed. He would sort of toss in bed and sort of big sort of sighs, like, oh God, and would sort of roll his eyes a bit. And at the time, I just thought, hmm, there's something not right. Most people would sort of show some sort of compassion for someone who's really upset, and I thought that's a bit strange. But the next thing was, one morning I'd made us some coffee and I'd used his plunger. I'd made him one and taken it to him, and he came into the kitchen and he saw that I hadn't emptied out the coffee grounds. He got so angry so quickly, and he was so frightening. I can see it. I can't remember what he said because I was so frightened, but I remember the look on his face, and I remember he accused me of not emptying out his coffee plunger. And I stood there, and I do remember saying, yes, I have, but I knew I hadn't because I'm standing there holding it, with coffee grounds in it. And I don't know why I said that, but I just didn't know. I was so scared. Then he just grabbed it from me and he stormed out of the house and he threw the coffee grounds into the garden. And then he stormed back into the house and he sort of smashed it down on the bench and walked off. And he didn't talk to me for days. I was in shock. I was so traumatized. I kind of feel like now I know all the terms. I think I must have sort of dissociated during that because I can only sort of see what happened as opposed to remember exactly what he said. But all I know is from that moment, I was absolutely terrified. And it wasn't that he was screaming at me or, like, it wasn't a sort of screaming, shouting, or anything like that. It was just this rage. And it was, if you'd been in the next room, you probably wouldn't even have known that something was happened. It's something in his face. It's very, very dark hatred. I just couldn't understand. I mean, it was just some coffee grounds in the bottom of a plunger. I've just invited this person into my house to live with me. He's told me how I'm the most amazing person in the whole world. He's now living with me. Cognitive dissonance. I think he's the most amazing person, yet he's just done that. It just doesn't make any sense. It didn't, and I think that's when I started to lose my reality because he didn't speak to me for days and it was very, very hurtful. I was just beside myself. I didn't know what to do. But then he came back to me and he was sort of remorseful and he sort of said, "Oh, I'm sorry, and I love you." And then I was so relieved and everything was going to be okay. I was already having IVF treatment at that point when he did that. So we were already on this road that I felt I couldn't get off because he had end stage renal failure and was on dialysis every second day. He had a dialysis machine in my house. And, like you sort of feel like you can't kind of just go, well, that's not very nice. Now you have to leave. He was really sort of established in my life. And I was so relieved when he came back and said he was sorry. But what I didn't realize was that would set up the next 15 years of being incredibly horrible to me and then being super nice and then being very, very, very mean and callous and then so loving and sorry. It never ended. Intermittent reinforcement.
That's something that people who have not dealt with this type of person in their own life don't understand. It really is all of a sudden one day it's like you're dealing with a completely different person. This is completely different from the way that they behaved before. There was not even, in a lot of situations, even an inkling of this type of behavior or this kind of personality. It's really, really shocking. And that can be super difficult for people to sort of grapple with, like, what is going on? Who even are you? People are just left shocked. They really cannot understand what has happened. It's extremely difficult to square these kinds of things in your mind with the person that you thought you knew, that you have seen up to this point.
Over 15 years, I experienced the most intense gaslighting. He would behave towards me and speak to me in person in a certain way. A lot of the time, it was really horrible. He had so much contempt for me, I now realize. So he would be a certain way to me, and over the course of the relationship, it would get worse and worse and worse. The treatment would get worse and worse. He escalated and escalated and escalated to the very end. But the whole time, he was conducting another relationship with me, and this was the written record of our relationship. If you went through and read all of our written messages, you would see a completely different relationship and you would see a completely different person. The record of our relationship within those messages and emails, it bears no resemblance to reality, actual reality. It's shocking. And The reason why I know this is because I've got that record. After he had escalated his abuse, I found, because I'd just got a phone, that I could record what he was saying. And even though I have no memory, well, very little actual memory of what he was like, because it was so frightening, I would just dissociate. When I started recording him, I had a record of what he was actually saying to me in person. And I can now exactly contrast that with the messages that he was writing to me at the time, and they bear no resemblance to each other whatsoever. Completely different person. He started telling me that you're constantly slagging me off to our son, and you're trying to destroy our relationship. And you tell our son that I don't love him. He said that to me one night. I was so shocked. It made no sense to me whatsoever. I couldn't believe it because I know I wouldn't do that. I know I hadn't done that. So I'm not that sort of person who would do that to their own child, who would tell their own child that your father doesn't love you, your father doesn't love you. This is what he was saying to me this is what he said, this is what he accused me of doing.
This is another thing that people who have not dealt with this type of person in their lives, they tend not to understand whenever they are told, this is what this person said to me, this is what this person has done, this is what this person thinks or believes or says that I think and believe. People tend to kind of say things like, oh, I'm sure they don't really mean that, or you must have misunderstood, or, nobody could think that, nobody would really say that. And it's like, no, they do. They do say these things, and many of them do believe them. And that is very invalidating and almost like unintentional gaslighting for people who are trying to reach out and say, hey, look, something seems really wrong in my relationship or with this person, and the other person that they're reaching out to is kind of saying, "Oh, no, you must have misunderstood." That's exactly what they're being told by the antisocial personality or the toxic personality. They're being told the exact same thing. You're misunderstanding, you're getting it wrong, you're the problem here. And even though people often, the reason why they're doing that is because they really do think nobody would say something like that. Unfortunately, some people do. And it's extremely confusing for people to be told on all sides, no, you're the one that's wrong. And this is really, really difficult, I think, for people who have not dealt with this in their lives to actually understand that it really does happen.
So I wrote him an email because I wanted to put his words back to him, and because I couldn't say it in real life because he was so angry with me, I couldn't defend myself. So I thought, I'll email him. So I said, among the other hurtful things you just said to me, that I'm constantly slagging you off to our child. I want you to know in writing that I don't do that at all. And given that fact, it is extremely hurtful and devastating to be told that, as if you and only you know the truth about my own behaviour with our child, when you're not even here to witness that is the truth. Because he was saying, I was saying it all the time, but he was at work most of the times. I don't know how he thought. Anyway, I said, that is a terrible thing to say about someone you profess to love, in inverted commas. And when I say I don't do that, you don't believe me. But I would never do that. I only say positive things about you to our child because you are his father and he loves you and I love you too. But when you say things like that, it makes me question why. And also, how can I cope with that accusation? How can I go on in this situation? The person who should love me more than anyone else thinks that lowly of me.
That's really the crux of the most painful thing about these relationships in some regards, because the person that you care about, a person that you love that purports to love you in most of these situations, is making these accusations against you and accusing you of terrible things based on nothing. Reality does not match up to what they're saying. If reality doesn't speak for itself, you don't have a chance in hell. That's really one of the most damaging things about most of these types of interactions, is that logic and facts and reality have nothing to do with anything.
The next day, he didn't say anything to me, he wasn't talking to me. Next after that, he wasn't talking to me still. So I went to him and I just tried to sort of make peace with him and say, look, let's pretend that never happened. And he said, you are doing everything within your power to ensure I don't have a relationship with our son. Another few days, still not talking to me. And then I get this email and he says, I didn't see your email until today. Are we still pretending this never happened? I'm sorry. I love you. He doesn't address anything that I've said. He just says, I love you, and that's it. We now pretend it never happened. I would say something to him and I would get nothing. I would get no response. But somehow I accepted that. And I don't know how I accepted that at the time. I just don't know. So I just, how you, you kind of get managed down, because if you don't accept their non-response, well, things aren't going to be good. He would then later use that for 4 years in the family court because then he played the alienated parent where, you know, I had told our son repeatedly for years that your father doesn't love you, your father doesn't love you. And it was me that had destroyed his relationship with his son, blah, 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 blah. He didn't remember that I'd written that email, obviously, so I had the evidence. It went through every sort of facet of the relationship. Financial control. After he'd received my sister's kidney, he was now able to move us to a different country. As soon as we moved to that country, and I'd stopped working because I'd moved to a different country with a young child and couldn't work, he started paying me what's the word, an allowance. And we had to live on that. That was for all of mine and my son's expenses and all the household expenses. And over time, his salary over the next few years increased by, 1,000%. He was very, very earning a lot of money, but we were living on $1,000 a month the whole time. It never went up. Everything was contradictory about him. Yet I always felt like he didn't want us, he didn't care about us at all. But I didn't have that in my conscious mind. I felt it at another level. Subconsciously, I knew he would just walk at any second. He didn't care about us in the slightest. In fact, he hated both of us. So even though I didn't know that in my mind, and I was highly dependent on him, we were nothing to him the whole time. It was all an act. It was all a big act.
This level of instability and insecurity and sort of on the brink quality is extremely common in these types of relationships, unfortunately. And it leads to people's stress and tension and their level of fear and insecurity in a very sort of fundamental way. Not insecurity as in you have a little bit of low self esteem, insecurity as in, like, I'm not safe in this situation because it can turn just like that. And I don't know when that's going to happen or what could happen or what's going to cause it. Like I have to walk on eggshells the entire time. That is extremely common in these relationships, unfortunately. And it takes an enormous toll on people's mental, physical, emotional health.
I was trying to fix a cupboard. He was doing his usual, playing computer games. I needed some help. He had already told me early in the day he was not going to help me. I don't know why. He got angry. He just said, I'm not helping you at all today. But I just needed someone just to hold the cupboard just for a minute while I put in the last screws. And he was the only one that could help me. And so I just said, could you help me? That made him so angry. He was so furious. He did it. He did help me, but he was utterly furious. And that night we went to bed and, with no one being able to hear, he said things to me like, get out of my bed, get out of my house. I mean it. It's my house. He told me I was obsessed, because I just wanted to finish fixing the cupboards. He swore at me repeatedly. He told me I was obnoxious. And so I wrote all this stuff down in notes. I wrote to myself, I can't remember the rest. It's too hurtful. A venomous spray of abuse, accusing me of all the things that you have done and said. Projection. I just said, I don't want to talk and I don't want to hear what you have to say. This is because of what you have said to me today. There is no chance of a conversation or discussion. It is just you telling me how I am and what I am. That was one of his ways. There were so many of them of manipulating me. So after that, I never asked him for any help ever again to do anything. I did everything around the house because that's what you get if you ask for some help. When things got really bad, which coincided with me losing my mobility, that's when he became the victim. And the real victim, a real victim. I was the worst person in the world and I had treated him so badly. What he was telling me I was and what I was doing and what I am is actually him. And the interesting thing about this to me now, in hindsight, is that even though I knew that back then, over time, I forgot. So when he escalated things later in 2017, 2018 to the point where he just threw us away, um, I'd forgotten. He was so projecting. He was projecting all the time. Everything was a projection. But I'd forgotten what projection was. I started listening to reading the work of a man called Evan Stark, who's an expert in coercive control, and he talks about something called perspecticide. He said gaslighting is very visceral. There's a close connection between gaslighting and violence. What is really happening in most gaslighting situations is that the woman is not responding, not because she doesn't know that she isn't right. When they forget what they know, it's a condition I call perspecticide. These women lose their perspective on reality. It's because they're too afraid of what the knowledge will bring. So, behind the gaslight games and coercive control is a terrifying situation. Women become stupid to their own self. It's not that they're forgetful or mentally ill, or that they're tricked by some deceptive Svengali. These guys are not Svengali, they are truck drivers, policemen, lawyers, doctors. But what it is that they are frightening. So the woman prefers to choose not to know what she knows. Everything he said to me was projection, and I could not see it. He was telling me that I treat him like shit. He was telling me that I have utter contempt for him. He told me that I am a psychopath one night. When I tried to organise couples counselling for us, he told me that I was trying to create a narrative for the divorce courts. Everything he was telling me was actually projection, and I could not see it.
Viewers of the content on this channel know that we contend that this type of personality is projecting all the time. Everything they are saying and they're projecting everything outward. Is the projection is nonstop. You're more caught up with trying to defend yourself against this constant onslaught of being told that you're somebody that you're not.
I was so confused. So I'd kind of forgotten what I had already known years earlier. I couldn't identify it when I was just living in this environment of projection. As the abuse escalated towards the end, I only know this because I recorded him. One night he told me I had Stockholm syndrome, and I just thought, what on earth are you talking about? But do you know what he told me? He said that the reason why I had Stockholm syndrome was because of our son, that our son was controlling me so much. I was under his control, which is bizarre because he was like 11 and disabled. He was telling me this, and I couldn't recognize it. He's actually right. I did have Stockholm syndrome, but it was because of his control, it wasn't my son's. And the other thing he was telling our son, he was accusing him of being antisocial. personality. And at the time, I didn't know anything about antisocial personality disorder. But now I recognize, well, that's actually what he has.
This is actually not uncommon at all in these types of dynamics, that the other parent or the other adult or the partner or whatever the situation may be is competing with a child, an actual child, for the attention of the other person, of the other adult or the parent or whatever they are. And they end up disliking the child and targeting them. Unfortunately, they will end up blaming them. They will end up attacking them because they're in competition with them.
Anytime I gave our son any attention, he would get extremely angry. Our worst argument came after I had months of lost mobility, and our son hurt himself, and I needed to give him medical attention. And he was so angry at our son initially for hurting himself. He'd had an accident, he'd fallen, and he'd scraped all the skin off his legs. And he came out so angry. What has he done? Accusingly, what has he done? And I just said, I don't know, because I was, in a different room and I could hear him screaming and I could see him through the windows, but he was outside and I didn't know. And then I put my hand up to sort of say, basically to say shush, like when you put your hand up to say don't say anything, because he was shouting at me, angry. And I wanted to hear what our son was sort of maybe saying in between the screams to find out what happened. And it's turned into the worst argument where he told me I wasn't allowed to help him. He wasn't helping him, but I wasn't allowed to help him. And when I tried to get medicine, some cream to put on his legs, he told me that if I put Savlon on his legs, then it was over. Our relationship was over if I put Savlon on our son's legs, and comforted him. We had hours of argument post this event, but during those, because I was recording them and I was terrified, I was so scared, but I just knew something was so wrong because nothing was making any sense. Why would you not help him? Why would our relationship be over if I put some cream on our son's legs? It's just crazy. But during our conversation, which was the classic round and round in circles of just word salad, bizarre stuff, weird accusations. One of the things he said to me at some point during this conversation about the event that had happened, was that I said to him at one point, I said, "But why didn't you go and help him? I'm on crutches. I can't go out there and help him." I eventually did, but it was very difficult for me. Whereas he's just standing there shouting at us. He said, "I couldn't get past you." He said, "Because you were blocking the doorway." And I said, "What?" I was meters from the door. I was in the kitchen, and he said, "No, no, you were standing there blocking me, so I couldn't go out and help him." And I just thought, this is just crazy. He's just made this up. So this wasn't the first time. This is one of many, many times, of very similar examples.
This is something that people who are dealing with these types of personalities find extremely hard to address and extremely hard to deal with because it's impossible, which is when someone's memory of something or their purported memory of something is of something that did not happen, and they are either truly believing that that really happened, or they know it didn't happen but they've convinced themselves over time, because a lot of times you'll find the more time that passes since an event, the more the story changes. And this is extremely difficult to contend with. How do you deal with delusion? And people often find themselves just standing there with their mouths hanging open because it's like, where are you getting that? This is also part of the day to day living with this type of person that people who have not dealt with this just really don't understand.
After that, he got worse and worse and worse. And one morning, few weeks later, one morning, he was being so awful to me and our son that we had to leave the house. I was so scared of him. I can't remember what he'd done. I can't remember what he'd said because I hadn't recorded it. But I just had that sense we have to get out of here. As we were leaving the house, he kind of said, "Where are you going?" I think. And he terrified me so much I couldn't actually speak. And so I just didn't say anything. And I just got our stuff together and I went to the front door and I opened the front door and he came up to us and he said to me, and I wrote this in a note. This is why only reason why I remember it is I wrote a note to myself as soon as I walked out of the house because I thought there's something really, really wrong. I wrote, "You're not fooling anyone with that narrative you're trying to sell, so good luck with that." That's what he said to me as I left the house. About half an hour after we left the house, after he said that to me, he sent me text messages. Well, actually, I must have sent the first one because I wrote to him, "I don't understand what has happened." And he wrote back, "Neither do I. But you have taken our son and left without explanation. So is this how you tell me it's over? You don't say where you are going or how long you'll be. It's clear I'm not welcome. Why are you going anywhere?" And then he says, "You can't read body language. I was close to tears yesterday, and you're asking me why I'm angry. What's the point? You've taken our son all morning. You can't even, without even saying you were going out. You've just told me you're taking him again for the rest of the day or longer for all I know, and you're wondering why I'm upset? And what are you telling our son about all this? I can imagine." So within half an hour of telling me that I'm not fooling anyone with my narrative, he's now playing this big victim. It was just so jarring and so bizarre. And I remember reading this and just thinking, what on earth? It was very victim based, that I was some kind of really bad person. I thought there's something really, really wrong here. In text message, he's the victim. But in my reality at home, I'm the victim.
Narcissistic personalities are consumed with making sure they look a certain way with image management. So it doesn't matter who the audience might be, that's what they're concerned about. They're very concerned with what people are going to think and narratives. And what are you telling everybody? And I know you're talking about me to anybody who will listen, and all this type of thing like that. And it's extremely unfortunate because they believe that everyone's doing that.
Well, there's all that sort of obvious stuff like I was experiencing full on anxiety. I began having panic attacks. I was just going a bit nuts, but he was telling me I was crazy. He was telling me I was mentally ill. I got complex regional pain syndrome. It took a little while to get diagnosed with that. Eventually, I would find out from my pain psychologist, and he was telling me that complex regional pain syndrome caused by prolonged long term subjection to emotional pain. I developed fibromyalgia. My pain psychologist said to me, "I've never treated anyone with your conditions that hasn't been subject to long term emotional pain." As I relayed different things that were happening at home, he just sort of said to me, "Why is he so mean?" I thought, "What? Oh, is he mean?" And he just looked at me and he said, "Have you ever wondered if your partner's a narcissist?" And I just went, "Oh, no, no." I didn't even know what a narcissist was actually, but I just thought it was someone that was very sort of, vain. That's pretty much where I began to sort of, well, that was sort of the beginning of sort of starting to understand what on earth was going on. I became completely obsessed with trying to understand what on earth had happened because I felt like I'd been in this massive fog of of I felt like I hadn't been alive or conscious. I felt like
Yeah.
I'd been in a cult. I felt like I'd been completely brainwashed and that I hadn't seen anything that was real. That I'd lived in a complete bizarre existence. And I was obsessed with trying to understand it. This involved rumination like you wouldn't believe. All I thought about all day, every day, was what had happened, reliving things, listening to recordings and going, oh my gosh. And looking at the text messages they were sending me and going, oh my, just starting to realize and just um, having, just reliving it all, but now from a more sort of, some sort of more understanding of what had happened.
This is extremely common. People find that they have to look back over everything that's happened in this relationship or in their association with this person, and they're viewing everything through a completely different lens. And it's very shocking. It's very difficult to understand. It's really, really hard to deal with, but it is part of how these things are processed, how the shock has gone through, and what has happened to somebody is able to be understood, and it can take a while.
But the rumination, it just was just terrible. It was just never ending. I felt like I was going a bit mad because I just could not get it out of my head. And do you know what? It was painful because I felt like I was having this horrendous withdrawal. I've never been a drug taker, so I don't know what a actual withdrawal from, say, for example, opiates is actually like. But I've seen it. I've seen movies and stuff, and it actually felt like that. I felt like I was addicted to the drama, and I would no longer sort of really had it. It wasn't in front of me. It wasn't in the house. It was still coming at me via lawyers, but his behaviour had hijacked my chemistry of my brain. The whole cortisol, and then dopamine and cortisol and dopamine, and that constant up down up down up down. It had wrecked me.
There is a real addiction involved in these situations. And a lot of times people sort of take a little umbrage at that because they're like, well, but I don't even like it. And how can you say that I'm addicted? It doesn't really have anything to do with liking something. Addiction is not about liking something. Addiction is about becoming dependent on something. It doesn't mean that you've done anything wrong. It doesn't mean you did anything on purpose. It's just something that happens sometimes. And whenever this is talked about, that is often not talked about enough. And it's part of the reason why separating from these people can be so painful. And it's part of the reason why trying to get out of these relationships is so difficult. Is that really needs to be considered whenever people are looking at exiting these relationships and things like that, why they're having such a hard time. That can play an enormous part in that.
He got rid of us by assaulting our child physically and verbally. It was terrifying. He had planned it all. I found out later that he was moving money around bank accounts. This is on after months of telling us we have to leave, that we have to find alternative accommodation. The whole time he's text messaging me saying he loves me and sending me kisses. So, I've still got hope. He was very antisocial himself as a person. He didn't seem to have any friends. We never had anyone come to our house, for example. I don't have any photos of him and me. After 15 years, he moved us from our away from my home and my extended family, um, primarily for his job. But I think it assisted him. We now we're in close proximity to our family. But even so, even if we had been, I think it would have had the same outcome. I had no idea that I was being abused because of the manipulation. If anyone came to stay with us, he would have a huge meltdown at me, either before they came or after they left. Made me isolate myself in a way because even though I didn't consciously make the connection between his meltdowns and the fact that someone had just visited or someone was about to visit, I think subconsciously I knew it. Do you know what I mean?
People who live with toxic and antisocial personalities end up being a target. Whatever stresses this person out, whatever is upsetting them, whatever angers them, whatever is in any way bothering them or making them have like a negative emotional experience is taken out on the other people around them. Sometimes one specific person, sometimes everybody. And it really is very targeted. That person is actually often blamed for causing the problem, for causing the negative feelings, for causing whatever it is that this person can't deal with. And unfortunately, it's extremely super common. And it's one of the things that is so confusing for people because it's like, well, look, I didn't do anything. Why are you upset with me? And the reason why it happens is because these type of personalities cannot hold their own negative emotional experiences. They have to project them outwards. They have to try to get rid of them somehow, and they have to blame them on somebody. And the people who are in proximity to them serve all of those purposes.
I started seeing a counselor in 2014 because I was getting these terrible anxiety and panic attacks. All I remember from going to see her was all I remember is crying. I don't remember anything that she said. I don't remember anything I said. I just remember crying all the time in her sessions. And it wasn't until I was in the family court and he was making all these bizarre, crazy, untrue accusations that I started to kind of, I was looking for all the records of what had happened because I couldn't remember hardly anything, and it was all, but I knew what he was saying wasn't true. And one of the things I did was I got my records from that counselling, and when I opened them and read them, I was just so shocked. The words that kept coming up were DV, 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 DV. And I was like, what does DV mean? And I ended up asking a child protection investigator who came to our house um, because he was just happened to be there at about the same time as I received the counselling records. And I said to him, what does this, do you know what DV is? And he looked at me and he said, domestic violence. And I looked at him and I just, I was just, I couldn't believe it. After all of this, I was in shock because I was thinking, huh? Domestic violence? About 2, 3, maybe 4 years before it got seriously so bad. Um, I remember one night, I remember standing in the bedroom and just thinking to myself, if he hits me, I'm leaving. That was the only thing I knew that domestic violence was. Do you know what I mean? I didn't recognize that domestic violence is all these other things. And I had pretty much all of them except physical violence. But because he wasn't hitting me, I couldn't recognize it. And because the manipulation was so severe, I couldn't recognize it.
That is unfortunately extremely common. Many people do not understand that abuse is not just hitting. It's not just spitting on you or kicking you or punching you or throwing things at you. It can be many other things.
I was seeing that all the time. Something's wrong, something's wrong, something's wrong. And I didn't go anywhere because I was trapped. But the ultimate point was when he physically hurt and injured our child in front of me, and he was shouting all this the whole time that our son is a piece of shit, a sack of shit, just terrible verbal abuse. At that point, I was in shock. Then he told me that we're separating. He said, because of our child's assault on me, we are separating. Oh, and your encouragement and rewarding of his behavior, which led to apparently our child assaulting him, we are now separating. And he was gleeful to announce that to me. I was completely addicted to him and dependent on him. But for the first time, I thought, I know what I just saw. He's telling me something completely the opposite, but I know what I just saw. Obviously, we had to leave because we were in physical danger.
That is the moment we often talk about here on the channel, and it was the focus of the episode called The Wake Up Call, which is that eventually there's going to come a point where something so egregious or so bizarre and in the twilight zone is going to happen, or this person is going to accuse you of something so crazy that you're just going to be like, okay, I that's too much. There's no way I can justify this. I can't be gaslit into believing this. It's just not possible. That is the moment when people come out of the fog.
It took a physical assault to kind of break through that fog to see my child being hurt by his own father. Really hurt. So upsetting. In retrospect, and when I look back over all my notes and my diary stuff and my everything, all the written records, he was telling me that he hated our son for a long time. He hated him. And I think the reason why he hated him was because he was disabled. I remember crying a lot, being with my dog. She was with me all the time. And she'd just look at me and I saw so much empathy in my dog's eyes. How did I cope during? I guess it was just complete denial. Even though I wasn't consciously aware of it, just forget. I would just forget anything. And as far as I knew, my life was normal. I was crying a lot. My dog would be there for me, with me, but that was normal. And I didn't realize that that was not normal. I was just always busy, always doing things. He expected me to be like a mother. Afterwards, I went to, first of all, I saw a psychologist, a trauma psychologist, and she helped me a lot. I came across your videos, and that helped me understand a lot. It kind of helped me begin to take the emotion out of it and more apply a more cognitive understanding of what had happened, which I think reduced those terrible, confused, emotional craving. Then I took my son to a psychiatrist. We both ended up with a psychiatrist, where even better was explained what was happening. And so just a lot of external help. I had a best friend that listened to me talk a lot. She was amazing. She understood and actually listened and didn't make me feel like I was, taking up her time by talking about it endlessly, which is what I did. Just cleaning. I just cleaned and painted and cleaned and painted him out of my life. I got rid of everything that reminded me of him. The main strategy was leaving the city where this had all happened. That was a good circuit breaker. And in terms of strategies now, I just try to not think about it because it's like I feel like I still really do have an addiction. I guess it's just like if I had an alcohol addiction, you are consciously having to fight succumbing to it.
Once addiction pathways are created in your brain, they are always there. That's one of the reasons you hear people say no contact is so important. You have to make sure the addiction is broken. And it's like if you're going to quit smoking cigarettes, then if you say you're going to quit smoking on Thursday, when you wake up on Friday, you are going to still want to smoke. You have to make the decision not to smoke anymore. And the way you do that is by getting rid of the cigarettes, not buying them anymore, not smoking them anymore. That's kind of like what no contact is. It's throwing the cigarettes away and not buying more.
Well, I now know that I was very naive because I honestly believed bad people were easily identifiable and you could stay away from them. And basically that everyone else thought like me. I thought that everyone is honest, that everyone is able to, that everyone's like me, which is not true. That's such a dangerous assumption. I assumed that everyone had empathy. It's not true. So that's what I've learned about myself, that I was naive and that I'm projecting all my good qualities onto people that those qualities aren't there. In fact, the opposite is there.
That's such an important shift in perspective. We all tend to understand everything through our own paradigm. That's why narcissists think that everybody is like them. It's the same way why we tend to think that everybody is like us, and unfortunately, they are not. It's really, really important for our safety and self protection to understand that just because we have certain qualities doesn't mean that everybody else has them.
I will never have another one. I don't need another person in my life. I'm quite happy. I think once you're in a situation like I was in, after the initial stage, you can't tell anyone anything because nothing will go in. No amount of advice will be able to reach you. So I guess the only point at which I could give advice to not be in something like this is at the extreme outset. When you have a feeling that something is not right, anything like that, just once, even once, got to really pay attention to it. If you get it again, then you just got to leave. You cannot progress a relationship when you've got any feelings like that, because there will come a point, and it will be very quick, where you will not no longer be able to recognize, you won't have those feelings anymore. You'll just be under so much manipulation that you are now unreachable. Pay attention to those red flags at the beginning. It's so important. It can be the difference between, basically between life and death. Two times I actually did drive out of our house with the intention of driving off a bridge, and not really knowing why, just knowing that I didn't want to live any longer because I was destroyed as a person. I felt destroyed. I and I felt couldn't live any longer. It was just so horrible. You're with someone that wants to destroy you. So I'm trying to rediscover myself and my values and my love. By the time he'd finished with me, I almost felt like I had no emotion in me. Like I felt like a hollowed out shell of a person, like he'd killed me. I felt dead inside. I'm trying to rebuild myself to bring myself back, because he didn't kill me and he won't kill me and he can't kill me, because I can feel love and I can feel gratitude. I have my son and I have my love for my family and I have love for life. My life is now so peaceful. It can come back and you can come back. They can't destroy you.
No one can take from you who you are. You can lose touch with that. You might not be able to find it for a little while. You might become confused. You might get traumatized. No one can take from you who you are. That's always yours. You will always have it. No one can take it from you.
I think it's really just time. I think over time, with that cognitive understanding of what's happened and time, I guess the strategy is just do things that you love, try and find the things that you used to love doing, try and do them again, and try and get back that joy that you once had. It's not so much about me, it's about my son. He doesn't have a father now. And I guess it's just I just focus on my son's future and hopefully helping him to, have the best life that he can given the terrible circumstances of, his past, his early life. I feel like I have had an experience that I wouldn't want anyone to go through. I wanted to feel like I could make some contribution to this not happening to other people, and I haven't really known how to do that. By doing this with you, it's been the only way I've actually been able to do that.